anyone's faces. So I would like to say if you have questions, Arnold, how are we doing questions at the end or?
Yeah, we'll do questions at the end. Yep.
Great. So I was asked to talk today a little bit about the K-12 education space, especially as arising from the COVID-19 pandemic. And we've been doing some work on this at EPIC, so I will try to keep it to the time allotted. I can maybe move my screen. Okay. And you guys can see the slides?
Yep, we're good.
Okay, just a quick little bit of background on EPIC. EPIC is a policy center at Michigan State University. We are independent and nonpartisan, and we operate as a strategic research partner to the Michigan Department of Education. And we work to provide evidence to all education policymakers and stakeholders throughout the state of Michigan. We are devoted to what I like to call research with consequence, which is the idea that rigorous evidence can improve education policy and practice, and ideally, ultimately, students' lives. To do this, we conduct all original research using a lot of different methods to produce what we hope are insights that can help decision makers use to create and implement policy and to improve policy. This has been tested during this time, during COVID. So we feel like our responsibility as researchers committed to research with consequence means that we have to do everything we possibly can to provide students with high quality learning experiences during this time. And that means that we need to make sure that we're working as hard as we can with stakeholders and policymakers across the state to provide them with whatever evidence is going to be useful. To do this, we have done a lot of different sort of sets of research over the last 6 months, and I'm going to talk mostly from those data today, but I will also provide a little bit of an overview first. So for today, we're going to talk first about what are the general concerns about the provision of K-12 education during the pandemic, and then we'll talk about what are other states doing in relation to K-12, and then focus in on Michigan. What did Michigan do last spring, and what do we plan to do this fall? Real quick, just some of the learning concerns that have been really surfaced by educational experts across the country and policymakers and practitioners within the schools and districts. The first is not a secret, right? We think the pandemic is going to widen already existing inequities in K through 12 education. The kids who are already getting great educations and have a lot high resource districts and have high resource schools probably are going to falter a little bit less than those who live in areas with less internet access, that live in areas with lower levels of ability for the parents to be able to support the kids in online learning or in hybrid learning. And so the research community has been very, very concerned about how this is going to impact and widen existing disparities. As I kind of just hinted at, technology is really key in this. So we will show today, and also there's been a lot of research that already has suggested that technology is the key educational resource for families when they're learning in any way at a distance, or when there's the threat of going back and forth to learning at a distance. If students don't have internet access or electronic devices that are reliable, it's hard to know how they will do the virtual learning that is being expected of them. This is particularly the case, but especially for students with disabilities and homeless students, English learners, these folks especially need extra help and extra support. And educators in particular are needing extra support to know how to help these students during this time. It's not just academics, right? We also know that kids are struggling in terms of their access to nutrition, to socio-emotional assistance, and to mental health. And then the last thing that I think is becoming very clear as we watch what's happening across the country, districts and schools are going to need more money, not less money, to provide a high quality K through 12 education. And this is especially the case in the areas that are traditionally underserved. So just to kind of put a little bit of a picture with what I was just talking about, these are just some projected learning losses from NWA, which is one of the benchmark assessments that is most popular across the country. And they have been in place for years. And so they have a lot of data that happened in the fall, the winter, and the late spring on how kids are doing in terms of their learning. And they've done a lot of work to understand what happens over the summer, and so a growth trajectory over the year, and then what happens over the summer. So they had a lot of kids who had taken the winter test before schools closed in March, or school buildings closed in March. Schools remained open, but the buildings closed. And so what you see here on this slide is the math projections. And so what they show you is for every grade, 7th through 3rd grade, the solid lines, that's what happens usually in terms of typical growth and summer loss, right? So you see this kind of increase in growth on their test over time until about mid-June when schools usually end. And then you see a slight downward shift as kids learn less and actually lose some of their knowledge over the summer. And what they did is they put back to where the school building closures happened in mid-March. And they projected, based on research on absenteeism and their own data on summer slide, what would happen to make it like what the curve would look like if they stopped learning in mid-March and actually started the slide of not having any instruction at that point. And you see that it's pretty concerning. Projections show that under COVID loss in the abbreviated 2019-20 school year, students only had about 2/3 of the learning gains in reading, and I'll show you that the next slide, and had about a 1/3 to 1/2 of average gains in a normal school year for math. So we think that really we're going to see kids are going to come into the fall in substantially lower places than they started. And because school looks so different this year for many, many kids in the country, and especially in Michigan, we're assuming that they're also not going to see the typical growth trajectory after that. And so we're looking at these disparities we're looking at learning loss pretty substantially over the course of this coming year as well. And this is it for reading. Okay, so what are states doing with legislation in relation to the pandemic? Oh, right. Before I get to that, I want to kind of go through the data that we have, because this is data that we collected with IPPSR, actually. And we created a database of key state legislation related to K-12 education during the pandemic, and we've been updating that pretty regularly as we go. And it is on the website, and I'll give you the link in a second. We also use other sources of data during the rest of this presentation. We did code up all of the March continuity of learning plans that districts put in place. We also had surveys out to educators in K through 8 in May through June of last year. So we understand what educators, principals, and teachers were thinking about what was going on inside their schools. And then we have recently coded up the August return to learn plans, or the extended continuity of learning plans, for all districts in Michigan to understand what kind of instructional modality they're offering this year. We tie that to a bunch of administrative data so we can look at the data in different ways. So here's the data from the IPPSR EPIC data set. So what we show here is that most states leave decisions to local control. So nearly every single state, that's 47 of the 50, deferred to local districts on whether or not they should open in person in the fall and in what ways. This has led to kind of a patchwork of different things happening across states and within states. Very few states have provided detailed guidance about school and district operations, like required hours of instruction, the graduation requirements, promotion retention decisions, attendance, and grading. And in terms of funding, which is crucial right now, some states have actually made cuts to their K-12 education budgets. Usually Colorado cut more than $500 million in funding. Georgia cut about $1 billion in funding for its K-12 schools, and Missouri cut over $130 million. And then some states are also using the CARES funds to help fill in those gaps or supplement the budget. So how does Michigan look compared to that picture? You can see if there's a takeaway, put it here, sorry. So Michigan's Return to Learn roadmap is one of the most comprehensive sets of guidance that we have seen out there, noting that it is providing suggestions for the most part, not requirements, but providing sort of a guide for what districts might be thinking about as they put into place policies. Michigan's also provided legislation about attendance, instructional hours, and benchmark assessments through HB 5912 and 5913. They've done things like waiving instructional hours for the 2021 academic year. Attendance requirements for funding have been waived if there's a two-way interaction occurs between each student and their teacher once a month. HB 5913 required administration of benchmark assessments within the first 9 weeks of school and at the end of the school year. And has required that there's actually a study to understand what happens to kids on aggregate over time in the state. And they also level funded the K-12 education budget, which is a big deal. Okay, so what did Michigan districts do last spring? And again, we know this from the continuity of learning plans in March and from our surveys of teachers and principals. So this is from the continuity of learning plans. You'll see that we have the proportion of districts on the y-axis, and then these bars each show the different kind of instruction that districts were planning to offer in the spring. I want to make a note that hybrid means something different now than it meant then. So hybrid last spring meant that there was a mix of online and hard copy instruction and instructional materials being provided to kids. This year, hybrid obviously means going to school only a subset of days of the week, not the full time. So you see in the spring last year, districts were planning to offer 40% of districts were offering virtual instruction. So they were offering all of their instruction online, whether or not in person, whether or not synchronous or asynchronous. It was all done via the internet and computers. About 40% also offered instruction in a hybrid format. So they did some things in hard copy materials and some things in virtual materials. And then a far lower proportion, only 11% of districts actually plan to use primarily hard copy media. We did see some districts say they did this differently by grade level. This has implications for how kids learn. So for starters, if you don't use any hard copy material and kids don't have internet access, then it's unclear how they access the instruction. But if you do everything hard copy and not virtual, we know that virtual learning is a lot more interactive. It has the opportunity to be able to have an interaction and engagement with a faculty member or an adult on the other end of the screen. And we know from research that is a more effective way to teach young kids in many instances. So I flipped that graph on its side here to show you how this looks and it varies by broadband internet access. And you can see the planned use of virtual instruction really does vary by broadband internet access, such that districts that had a high proportion of households in their communities that have broadband internet access are more likely to offer virtual instruction, and the folks with low broadband internet access are much less likely to do so. So we asked the teachers about the challenges that they had faced during the spring. And here are some of the answers that they gave us. And so you see that they reported fairly substantial challenges with technology and virtual instruction. So even though about 80% of districts were doing some of their instruction virtually and online in the spring, we see that over 3/4 of teachers said that consistent internet access for their students was a really big challenge in providing instruction. Similarly, about 75% of teachers talked about how difficult it was to facilitate student participation in virtual activities. And a high proportion of teachers also said that kids didn't have the technology training. They didn't know how to use the online platforms. We also heard that it was hard to have facilitating student-to-student interaction. And so one of the things about education inside a school building is that kids can interact with each other, and this is developmentally appropriate and good for them. And that's very difficult to do in an online setting. We also saw a majority of teachers tell us that there was not enough available technology for students, and that they didn't have enough training for themselves for these kind of virtual learning tools. So given that we've seen that, again, 80% of districts were offering some kind of virtual instruction in the spring, that these are the challenges teachers were facing, tells us that there was challenges to this kind of instruction. So teachers asked for support to facilitate remote instruction. So this is the portion of teachers who told us that support would be helpful in the spring of 2020. We have 4 panels here. The first one asked about, would improved physical learning resources be helpful? The second would access to printing services, right? So these are about having hard copy media. And then we asked about better internet access for students. And then at the bottom, access for students to a reliable home computer or suitable device. We can see that there was substantial challenges, 80% or above they said 80% or above of teachers said they would prefer better internet access for students and access for students to a reliable home computer or suitable device. About 60% of teachers would like more support with physical learning resources and printing of packet-based resources. What the bars to the right show us is we cut the data by grade range, by ELA achievement or English language achievement on their tests, by income or socioeconomic status as the purple bars, and by broadband access. And you can see that especially these dark blue bars, the grade range bars, you can see that for K-3 teachers, they really wanted more support in terms of physical learning and the print media, more than did the 6th through 8th grade teachers. So there seems to be something there about how kids are learning. We also see in the purple bars on the bottom that the low SES, so the poorer districts, those teachers were more likely to say they needed help with giving their kids reliable home computers or suitable devices. Less of an issue for the high income districts, and same thing in terms of broadband access. So here we compare what districts were doing or saying they were going to do in their plans in March relative to what teachers said in our survey responses. And you see on the left that 27% of districts said that they were going to provide some kind of professional development or training as part of their continuity of learning plans to help teachers transition to remote learning. However, 3/4 of teachers told us in May and June that they wanted more virtual training resources. So while there were some districts who were trying to do this, the huge majority of teachers were saying they needed more. So here we ask a little bit more about what resources would help educators as they were trying to provide remote instruction. And we see that educators wanted virtual resources that help them actually do the teaching, right? So they wanted models of digital classroom practices all the way on down. So I'm going to take a second to actually explain this graph because I use it a couple times, a graph like this in the rest of the presentation. We ask these questions and we give them a scale like not at all to a great extent. And so you see on the left-hand side of the bars, the 0% bars, proportion of teachers or principals who said not at all or to a small extent. And on the right-hand side of those bars, you see to a moderate or great extent. And we have on the left principals and on the right teachers. And so what you can look at the green and dark blue bars, that tells you that teachers or principals really wanted some kind of a support. And so you can see at the top was principals and teachers both alike said they wanted models of digital classroom practice. They wanted to know how to do this. They wanted to have someone help them walk through it. They also wanted virtual training resources on effective digital learning strategies. This cannot be stressed enough. Teachers are not prepared to teach online. That is just not what we prepare them for in most of our educator preparation institutions. And so they needed some support on how do we do this effectively? How do we help kids through the computer or in a remote setting? They also wanted digital platforms that actually help them provide the content they would need. And they were hoping for some ready-made lessons to deliver that they could do kind of out of the box. They were less concerned about better internet access and access to a reliable home computer or suitable device for themselves. So they were feeling that most of them felt that they had sufficient internet access and computing devices. So how did districts provide direct instruction? So we coded again all of the plans that districts submitted in March. Again, they were submitting plans at the get-go. They didn't really know how they were going to do this. So we know that they changed over time in the spring. And what you can see in the bullets on the right are that only about 9% of plans actually specified how many hours or lessons of direct instruction they were providing. By direct instruction, we mean actually engaged instruction where there's a teacher on one end providing learning time, providing opportunities for kids to learn and engage with them, and then providing them with an exercise or an instruction to do. So we found that of those 9%, the average time was about 11 hours per week of direct instruction, or maybe 5 or 6 lessons a week. That is clearly far less than the typical 8 to 3 school day that we would see. 16% of plans specified expected time on independent learning and schoolwork. So this is not them providing the instruction, but how much time they thought that kids should be doing independently. And the average time there was about 12 hours a week. We saw that younger students were provided with less instructional time and lessons, and rural districts planned for fewer hours of instruction and fewer lessons. And you can see that in the graph on the left. Okay, so when we asked educators about the concerns that they had as a result of COVID-19, you can see that they had a lot of concerns. So again, this is the teachers on the left now, principals on the right. And the green and blue bars are those teachers and principals who said they were concerned or extremely concerned about all those different items on the left. And you can see that the biggest concern, so almost 80% of principals and 80% of teachers said that they were most concerned with students missing instructional time. So they were very concerned in the spring that we were unable to provide our kids with sufficient instructional time. They also were concerned that students were going to come and return to school behind in literacy. And then you can see very close to the top, they were also really upset and worried about the long-term economic impact for their students. And so they recognized that this was not just a pandemic, but also a recession, and that there was a concern that they would have long-term outcomes and long-term effects of that. They were also worried about students returning to school behind in other content areas, not just literacy. And then they talked about students missing crucial services and supports, maintaining and building relationships with students all the way down. I wanted to pull out some of the concerns and challenges that we had with special populations of students, because one of the groups of kids, or some of the groups of kids that we're most worried about during this time, have been kids who are not traditional learners. And so kids who have IEPs or 504 plans with disabilities, English language learners, folks who are struggling with literacy and reading. And so you can see on the left what teachers said were a challenge, and on the right, what the district plan said that they were actually doing in the spring. And you see that 2/3 of teachers said that they were having a lot of challenges with providing supports to students with disabilities. And 70% of districts said that they were making accommodations for these kinds of kids. The next row down, you see that about 39% of teachers said they were really having challenges with providing supports and services to English learners. And about a quarter of districts actually plans discussed that they're making accommodations for these kids. And then on the very bottom, you see that 69% of teachers said they were having challenges providing instruction and continuing access to literacy intervention services. So for kids who struggle with reading and writing, but only 4% of plans actually addressed any accommodations for these kids. Okay. So the last set of data I'm going to present come from our analysis this August of districts' return to learn plans. So for those of you, I'm sure most of you know, districts are required to provide a plan to their ISDs, and that went on to MDE in late August with what they were going to do this fall. So we just coded these for the modes of instruction that districts were planning on providing. And we coded them for these 5 groups. Were you going to provide fully in-person instruction to your students, fully remote instruction? So those are the opposite, right? You're 5 days a week inside the school building versus 5 days a week in virtual instruction. Some sort of hybrid in which you do fewer than 5 days a week in person, but not all of it at home. And then we had 2 options. Could you do a fully in-person option? So you had the option to go 5 days a week or to do a hybrid or fully remote. Or did you have a hybrid option, which said that you had a choice between hybrid and fully remote? So here's the breakdown. We coded this because the plans required districts to tell us what they were going to do in both phase 4 and phase 5 regions, for MERC regions. So you can see the breakdown of the regions up top, and we coded the districts for whatever region they were in. So whatever plan was supposed to go into effect that September. And you can see on the left, all districts, and we split them up by traditional public school districts and public school academy or charter school districts. The big takeaway here, if you look at the all districts line, is that 59% of districts combined, those top 2 rows, gave kids the option of being fully in person 5 days a week inside school buildings. Another 27% gave kids the option of at least being inside school buildings a part of the week. Only 12% of districts said fully remote only. So only 12% of districts in the state only offered instruction virtually. So here's what the map of the state looks like. What I think you can tell is that they clump, right? And so those purple areas are the fully remote only areas, and you can see where they are, and you can see how they kind of clump around some urban centers. And then we get asked a lot, well, what does this mean for kids? And so here it is weighted by students. And you can see that it changes a little bit. So while 16% of districts offered fully in person, only 9% of students were offered that option, or given that option were given just the fully in-person option. So you can see those are mostly rural districts with low enrollment count. Similarly, the fully remote option, a fully remote only category, was 12% of districts, but 19% of students. And then on the far right, we looked at it for just the students who we classify as economically disadvantaged, so the ones who are low income. And you see that while 16% of districts gave a fully in-person only, that was about 11% of the most poor kids in the state. I flip the fully remote only, so that the ones that only offered virtual were 12% of districts, but 20% of the economically disadvantaged. Okay, so what does this mean about moving forward? I've been doing a lot of conversations with policymakers and researchers across the country, and we've kind of all come to a couple major takeaways that we think really need to be top of mind for people as we think about legislation and enacting policy as we move forward this year. The first one is that no matter what, we're going to see kids either in remote instruction or moving in and out of remote instruction throughout the year, at least until there's a vaccine. And so it's really important that we give every single student the necessary learning materials that they can fully engage in any kind of instructional modality. So even if our districts have gone back to fully in person, if there's a case of COVID and they need to shut down, we need to have kids ready to learn in some other format. This is particularly important that we continue to focus our efforts for both instruction and also student support services for the kids who are in the lower achieving districts, those who are economically disadvantaged, and those who are younger. There's a lot of concern about how do we help kids who don't know how to read learn remotely. I think it's a really strong, big challenge. And so we need to make sure that we're providing those kids especially with a special attention. We want to make sure we're building on what I know are educators' current efforts to provide direct instruction and frequent contact between students and teachers. Even if it happens virtually, there's a whole mental health and socio-emotional health issue that happens when you have engagement between adults and kids in school settings. And we also know that a lot of the time we need to have that kind of instruction to make sure kids are learning. So I think teachers and principals and districts are trying across the country to make sure this happens, but that's really important to keep our eyes on that prize. We saw that teachers want more PD. They do not know how to do this well, and they're learning on the fly. And so the more that we can give access to high quality professional development and resources for teachers and other educators, the better this is going to go this year. And the last thing I think is really important is that we have to keep equity of opportunity at the forefront when we plan for high quality instruction. It may not be that everyone gets everything, and we have to think about who needs more early on. I think I'm going to end there and open it up for questions, Arnold.
Well, Catherine, that's great information. We're very fortunate and lucky to have you and EPIC in this state to help us during this time and in education policy generally. I have actually no questions right now, but let me ask you one based on the information you've seen. I noticed on that map, as you noted, that strategies are clumping together across the state. What's been the experience of districts that went in person initially? How many have had to go to a hybrid or to a fully remote at this point in time?
So we don't know the numbers yet. That's totally anecdotal. We get a lot of calls actually about this map saying, this doesn't accurately reflect what my district is doing now. And we know that. Districts are required to submit new plans every month at this point. And so there is our data being collected now to understand what districts are doing in September and October and November on down. And we'll be analyzing those data to be able to kind of update these maps and look to see what's happening with changes across the state.
Great. Yeah, I'm particularly interested, just given from what I've heard in the Lansing area, about the fully in-person option. I know there was a report this week that Lansing Catholic in particular was, shall I say, tightening their reporting requirements. If you wanted to go remote, they had reports of students going on vacation. And so they really wanted to be sure that the students who were going remote really were focusing on schoolwork. So I think that'll be some interesting. The map shows, especially in northern Michigan, a lot of in-person options, Northeast Michigan and the northern part of the state. For sure. So your information moving forward is going to be very important, I'm sure, to the department and policymakers.
We hope so. And I think that the swath of green you see up there is largely because the case rates were so low up there in the beginning.
Right.
Now that doesn't carry through for the whole state. It's not that this is highly correlated with case rates actually. So actually some folks at IPPSR have done some of the analysis on these data that show that. So I think it'll be interesting to see as we go how this map changes as correlated to actual COVID spread.
Here's a question, and I think it's a good one. Do you have any data yet on academic performance as it relates to mode of instruction, hybrid, virtual, or in person?
We do not, although there was legislation that's going to require that to be examined in the future. So because Michigan required every district to implement a benchmark assessment in both the fall and the spring, we will be able to assess at the end of the year, how did kids grow? What does it look like relative to normal? Things like that.
Yeah. And, that's a great question, but I think you give a great answer, and it points to it's not possible in this instance to do real-time stuff, is it? I mean, you can't really tell how kids are learning in one option unless you study it over the course of time. It's really impossible to do a real-time kind of study, so to speak.
Well, if any district wants to work with us, we do work with districts as well, and we have the ability to upload the data. And we think it's really important that districts are thinking about what is working over time. So even if they have fall and winter data,
Right.
we're happy to take a look and say, it looks like this is what's happening for your kids who are remote versus your kids who are in person.
Yeah, and it'll be really interesting to see how this map changes as we move, say, from the fall to winter to spring and so on and so forth.
Yeah, it'll be fascinating, and hopefully we'll be optimistic.
Well, Catherine, again, I want to thank you so much for taking time. Again, I want to reiterate how lucky we are to have you. Look forward to other opportunities to present this information over the course of time. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Appreciate it. I'll let you stop sharing screen, and
Here we go.
thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Well, now I'd like to welcome Stephanie Glidden from Michigan's Unemployment Insurance Agency with us. Stephanie is the Chief of Staff at the Unemployment Insurance Agency.
I didn't give you a bio, Arnold. I'm sorry.
Nope, that's okay. Nope, we've got you. But I understand previous to that, you were the agency's legislative liaison. How long have you actually been with the agency?
Yeah, I've been with it. I'm coming up actually just my 1 year mark here in October.
Super. So Stephanie, I know that unemployment insurance issues are at the forefront of calls and contacts that legislative staff and the people they work for have been getting. And I know that I think the state Senate just passed some legislation as well. So maybe you can give us the lowdown and updates on actions your office is taking and what we can expect moving forward. Thank you for being with us here today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Bill. Hi, everybody. I've got kind of like a short prepared presentation, and then happy, I actually probably talk to most of the people you have on here on a weekly basis. We hold a weekly legislative staff call to provide crucial updates, I think, to staff to make sure that they know exactly what's going on in the agency. They're able to ask us questions, get their constituent issues addressed to the extent that we're able to on a phone. And just do all those things. And we do a weekly newsletter. So a lot of this information, I think this is one of the first times so many people have had exposure to the unemployment insurance program. I have a history of working with worker policy and worker rights, and so I've had a background in unemployment. But really until this pandemic, I think it's important to realize the exposure that the general public and the folks who are now a lot of time for the first time on unemployment, that their interactions they're having with our program and with our agency, as well as policymakers and staff, and just people across the board, now have such insight into the importance of unemployment insurance in our country, and then also just right here in the state of Michigan. And it often is a program that gets the spotlight in some of the hardest hit times of in our state and across the country. And so we get that spotlight, but then it tends to fade as we transition out of people needing those benefits. And so I really hope that this continues our conversation into the needed policy changes that the program needs, and that are certainly warranted. So I'll go ahead and share my screen here.
Stephanie, if I could interrupt you for a second, if you can move closer to the mic or be louder.
Let me plug in my headphones. Hang on.
Ah, okay, great.
That'll be better.
Okay.
I couldn't get my AirPods to work earlier. It kept buzzing, so I switched off to these.
Super.
1 second here. Okay, is that better? I'm hoping.
A little bit.
Oh no. Maybe my microphone is turned down. I use Microsoft Teams all day. I don't use Zoom.
Oh.
Input level, output level. Microphone. Hang on.
Maybe turn it up.
Okay, how's that?
That's better. That's better.
It was all the way down. I apologize.
Okay. Nope, that's okay.
Missed my whole intro there.
I think they got it. Thank you, Stephanie.
Great. You're welcome. All right, so I should be sharing my screen here.
Yep, very
Okay,
good.
great. Okay. All right, we're off to the races. Okay, so from the beginning of this pandemic, unemployment's had a series of 5 goals in mind, and first was really about expanding and extending eligibility and expanding access. We've extended eligibility for sick, immunocompromised, quarantine workers, and those who cared for loved ones. We've also, one of the first states to implement the CARES Act and expand coverage to self-employed and contract workers, as well as pay all of our unemployed workers the extra $600 a month that happened a little while ago during the enaction of the CARES Act. That quick action, I think, really, to expand coverage has helped support vulnerable workers during this time of need, and has really boosted, what I'll go into in just a second here, the economic outlook of Michigan. So our next goal was, to process and pay claims as quickly as possible. And our most urgent task the past few months has been just that. We first did that by cutting the procedural red tape through actions such as suspending normal in-person registration, work search requirements, different bulk actions for adjudication. But those things are, were mainly tied to the governor's executive order that we had been governing with. The UIEO, which is 76 at the time, right now it's number 76. Those things, those procedural red tape that we cut, the expanded eligibility, those things were all done through that executive order. And so we are still navigating kind of the impact that the most recent Supreme Court opinion has on our agency, has on our laws, on the eligibility of people, things of that nature. And I'm sure that will be a robust conversation here as we move forward. But we increased the auto adjudication, bulk adjudication, and we're working with third-party experts and our advanced analytics team to make sure we're going through the different queues and backlogs that we have in a smart way to make sure that we are able to process them as quickly as possible. And we've seen those dividends come through as being, really ahead of the country in making sure that people are paid their benefits, that our programs are implemented appropriately, and that we're meeting successful timelines with USDOL. So we've also staffed up. Prior to the pandemic, we only had 650 UI customer facing staff, 130 people answering phones. Today, we now have more than 2,300 customer facing staff helping claimants, with over 1,400 people assisting the call center. So that has been not an easy feat, but we have gotten there. So we've got new hires, temporary hires, we've gotten retirees to come back and help us with their expertise, and we've gotten a huge assist from the Michigan Works offices across the state. So our next goal was to maximize the federal drawdown. So since the beginning of the pandemic, we've put an emphasis on maximizing federal dollars that we provide to workers. It's critical stimulus to bolster the economy. Our quick action with the CARES Act, I think, really helped with that. And so the last goal here, number 5, preserve the health of the trust fund and help, I kind of combined 4 and 5, and help employers. COVID-19 has created, as we all know, a tremendous economic hardship for businesses right here in Michigan, large and small. Many job providers are experiencing deep financial distress through no fault of their own. And COVID-19, is a once in a generation economic crisis on top of a health crisis. So we know that, a business's survival rate through this period is imperative to the health of our state, and it's not guaranteed. So we wanted to make sure that we, focused on how we can help employers as well. And through the executive order, we ensured that we didn't charge employers for layoffs during this period. And so that we estimate through our analysis is around $900 million near-term tax relief for employers to make sure that they are able to stay afloat during this time. So keep moving here. So obviously you guys know unprecedented demand, incredible demand. We have processed over 2.6 million claims. That's 6 years worth of work combined into just 8 months, less than 8 months, 7 months. Just think about 6 years worth of work into 6 months. It has been incredible. 388,000 claims in 1 week was our peak. Before that, we were at around 5,000. And then even during the Great Recession, we peaked around 77,000 in 1 week. So we can just see the huge increase there. Here's our spike. I think every time I look at this, I just think to myself, like, it's just incredible, and it's difficult. And I know that we've said in the past, and we continue to, that we've paid
close to 98% of the people who've applied, but there's still, you know, that 2% is huge when you're looking at, you know, this graph here. So we want to make sure that those other folks are able to access, have the access in an efficient process with the unemployment agency. So it's come with operational challenges. You know, our phones, we were picking up 3% of our phone calls at the beginning of this crisis. We're up to about 65% with a path to 100. Our adjudication, we've simplified it. We've gone through analytics. We've increased staffing to reduce our backlog. And then, you know, fraud, unfortunately, this created a perfect storm for criminals to take advantage of this economic need of people. And we've seen waves across the country, state to state to state, of these criminals, both small and large international ones, just completely, you know, trying to inundate states with false claims, with imposter claims, using stolen data. I mean, they have real people's social security numbers, addresses, names, everything that they have to create these. And unfortunately, it catches up a lot of innocent people into the scheme. So doing our best to mitigate that as well. So just a couple more slides here. Economic impact. So we've paid, since March 15th, about $24 billion in unemployment benefits have been paid to more than 2.1 million workers. That, you know, in itself has had an incredible response to the economy. You know, the recent, at the latest CROC conference, you know, U of M economist Gabriel Ehrlich indicated, you know, that our efforts, that UIA's efforts to pay benefits quickly, and our nation-leading work search program, our WorkShare program, created, you know, credited with Michigan's outpace of, you know, we outpaced with consumer spending this past couple of quarters. So it's real. They're real dollars getting into real people's pockets, and luckily keeping a lot of folks afloat. So, you know, we've seen spending now 3 times higher than economists forecasted. And so it just helps us kind of see where we're at in terms of ensuring people are getting the benefits that they need. WorkShare, I know a lot of you guys have employers in your districts that have been calling, asking about questions. WorkShare was, you know, we're still leading the nation in WorkShare participation. And dollars drawn down from the federal government because of this program. I know that the big boom was like a month or two ago, but people continue to sign up for it as an economic recovery tool. And so, you know, we've seen that we've got overall over 18% of national participants are here in Michigan for WorkShare. You know, where 25 states didn't take advantage of this program. We luckily had it in place before this happened, but we really bolstered it. And with our executive order, we're able to expand the coverage and what type of employer can actually sign up for WorkShare to keep their workers employed, but keep them receiving some amount of unemployment benefit so that they can supplement their income when they have to reduce hours or when they have to come back with reduced hours. So we've seen that this has been a really, really successful program. So the impact of the Supreme Court decision. So, you know, there's still some lack of clarity on the impact. You know, Leo and UIA is working with the AG to understand the ramifications. You know, the governor filed a motion on Monday morning to request an effective date for this. You know, we've seen so many different things in the past, and so, you know, right now we're operating as we were until we're directed that we should change. And so what's happening now, you know, I still work with the legislature with UIA, and working with our Leo partners in the legislature as well, working with all of your guys' bosses to ensure that we get a fix through the legislature to make sure that if we have to retroactively look back, that everyone's held harmless, right? That we don't have to re-adjudicate all of these different claims, that people, you know, ensure that they maintain the weeks that they've already received, things of that nature. And so we're looking to, you know, implement, you know, the same protections that were in the executive order into statute to help hold people harmless, and to keep those expanded eligibility criteria, to keep the extra weeks that people have already used, things of that nature. So, you know, there's some large ramifications to this. I'm glad, I'm very excited that the Senate passed, you know, the bill this week. There's still a lot of technical changes that need to be made to it, make sure that it's covering the executive order as it should. And, you know, we're going into next week, you know, we're talking with the House and just making sure that everything is packaged up the way that we need it to protect the workers of Michigan. So, you know, I think that, you know, that's kind of my little bit of an overview of kind of what's happening in UI, a little bit of the forecast of the current situation with the Supreme Court decision. And so happy to, Arnold, take questions or have any kind of conversation you think would be effective here.
Thank you very much, Stephanie. Greatly appreciate that presentation. One question I have, going back to the unbelievable number of claims, a 6-year.
Yeah.
Wow. Has it, I noticed on the chart though, the claims have gone down since then. Is that right? Since that peak?
Yes,
Yeah,
they
there
have
it was.
gone down. Yep, they've gone down. That peak, 388,000 in just 1 week was our peak back in April. It has significantly dropped. We are seeing a shift toward a little bit of an increase in claim filing now, as I think some of their seasonal workers are beginning to start to see a change in their work, in their
Right.
their work situation. So it has gone down, but it is an impossible graph to look at, isn't it?
Yeah, no kidding. So I've got a dual question that's come in. Someone asked, with the new phone appointment program coming, will this be an increase in capacity for UIA, or will the folks that will be doing the call appointments being redirected from other phone lines?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. Something I didn't hit on here, but happy to give just a quick overview. So we did start. We launched a pilot program starting actually just on this past Thursday, or Wednesday and Thursday, to a select number of claimants to start to do phone appointments with us. It's been something that we've been trying to work toward, getting the call volume to drive down while increasing increasing the number of staff we have on there. And so we finally have gotten to this kind of sweet spot where we think we've hired on more people. So to answer the question directly, we have hired more people, gotten them trained up and staffed on the phones, gotten them, I think as all of us on this meeting here likely know, unemployment is complex. It is a program that is incredibly difficult to understand, especially as a worker. To somebody who maybe doesn't have that knowledge of the program before. And so it takes time to train. It takes time to be able to answer questions the way that a claimant demands it when they're on the phone, when if you're dealing with someone's livelihood. And so it takes time to train somebody, even just to be in the call center. And so we hired more staff, and we continue to hire more staff in what we call limited term staff. So they're people who are on a 6-month contract with the state workers. And we train them up in the call center for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, and we have this kind of transitional movement. So we do have new staff that have gone into the call center to replace some of the ones that we are taking off to do these appointments. And so there is an increased capacity, to answer the question directly. We shouldn't see a drop down in the number of calls that we're accepting every day, but we're increasing the capacity to now do these appointments. So,
and how many, as a follow-up to that, how many appointments will you be able to have a day using the phone system?
Yeah, so I think it's something that's to be determined right now. That's why we're kind of doing the soft launch to make sure that the technology that we have in place, and right now we're doing 20-minute appointments. So there's some science there to know exactly how long appointments for different topics take, how much transition time does staff need between appointments. And so there's a little bit of science behind it that we're still kind of figuring out with the soft launch, to know exactly how many appointments we're going to be able to have available on a daily basis, and for how long out we can schedule. Unemployment is very fluid, whereas somebody that schedules multiple weeks out for something may have their issue adjudicated, or may contact us and have their issue fixed if they have one before that appointment time. So we want to, there's kind of a sweet spot there. So we're not quite sure yet, with it having only launched on Wednesday. But as soon as we kind of firm up some of those numbers, I've got an email started already, a briefing document for legislative offices, so that they know exactly how this program is going to operate.
And what about, there have been some reports, of course, of false UI claims. How much of an issue is that? What is the expected impact on the balance sheet?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. There has been, tens of thousands of imposter claims filed. We know that for sure. There, have been attacks that come in waves. We saw across the country when PUC payments, the extra $600 a month, were being paid. It started this big wave of criminals. There's just so many dollars flowing that it is, like I said, that perfect storm for them to come in here and filed with, things like Equifax, things like the Target breach, things like all those different breaches that have happened over the past decade, the past 15 years. These criminals sit on that data and they sit on that information until these opportunities come. And so they run these programs and they file these claims. And so we know that, tens of thousands have been filed in Michigan. We've gone through identity verification through different analytics and different populations of these false claims that we've identified. And so we've been able to really reduce that greatly. But, Director Donna Frio, Leo Director, has said that likely, the exposure is in the hundreds of millions of dollars for this. And so we're still, we won't have a perfect picture into what the number of false claims that have been filed, the number of dollars, until we finish kind of a financial analytics approach. We've hired on Deloitte is here with the state with us doing that. I'm going to blank on the right word. They're doing an accounting look at exactly.
An audit.
Yeah, there you go. Yep. Doing that to really look at what happened and to try to stop it from happening in the future, to look at the books and to make sure that, we reduce our exposure as much as possible across the board.
And what recourse does the agency have when handling false claims?
Yeah, so there's a couple things. One, I will say that I am not our fraud expert. We have a whole fraud division that would answer these much more eloquently than I will. But there's a few different things. We have the Attorney General has set up a task force, a law enforcement task force, to bring to justice the people who are the criminals who are taking advantage of the situation. They have already, they've issued warrants. All kinds of warrants they've done. They've made they've done a lot of work already on some of the more local criminals that are taking advantage. But we have full prosecutory powers. I think that if we start to look at some of the smaller issues, people who are doing one or two false claims, and there's more power than some of these. I think it was Scattered Canary in Nigeria is one of the fraud rings that is really hitting some states. So it's difficult to find those, right? It's difficult for law enforcement, but we're working with DTMB cybersecurity, Michigan State Police cybersecurity, and enforcement with the AG's office to bring them to justice. So there's some wide scale, large look at the international, and there's some smaller ones for people who are more local that we're able to find, catch, and bring to justice.
And I don't know, you may have mentioned this, but of the $24 billion in claims paid, how much of that was federal money?
Yeah, around 18 billion of that, I believe. That was the last number in my head that I have, but I can certainly pull up the latest. I kind of have a waterfall data approach, but the last one I saw was like 18.8 of it is about what came federally. So we, like I said before, we're the country's leading state for federal drawdown with, I have that somewhere in my notes here, how much we have per, so Michigan received the largest amount of benefits when adjusting for the size of our labor market, with $2.9 million per 1,000 workers in the state. So we've really taken advantage of that and setting that as a goal in the beginning, knowing that was going to be there. Having lived through the Great Recession, seeing what USDOL's done in different programs in the past has allowed us to make sure that we got to 26 weeks with the executive order, knowing that we had to max out those weeks in order to get federal drawdown. And so we were really, tried to be as prepared as possible, and we tried to make sure that we know exactly where we can pull down federal dollars, and we did so. So I can look up a more up to date. The last one I had seen, it was about 18.8 million or 18.8 billion was federal dollars.
And what about the new program? You may have mentioned this as well. I might have missed it. What about the new program that the Senate is working on and you all are working on with the legislature? Where will the money from that come from?
With the lost wages assistance, is that what you're referencing?
Yes.
From the presidential memo? I think that's what you're talking about, Arnold. Yeah, so the lost wages assistance is fully federally funded. We get reimbursed for that. And so we actually have nearly completed paying out those dollars. We paid about 1 million people the lost wage assistance dollars. Michigan was approved for 6 weeks. And it's actually a strange program because it's looking backward. And so it's kind of these like retroactive weeks that people have been paid. If you were eligible for one or 6 of those weeks, you will have received an extra $300 benefit. And so just under, I think it's like 985,000 people so far have been paid those benefits. There's still some more people who have to go onto their accounts, and you have to proactively certify that you are impacted due to COVID. And that's why you're on unemployment right now. And so it's a different eligibility threshold than what happened in the past with the federal programs, which I think is important to remember. And as we talk with our federal partners, as we talk about programs here at the state, is that small changes like that from program to program are mountains sometimes to the technology changes that we have to make, and for the kind of the education gap between programs for our claimants. And so, a lot of folks, well, I got the $600, I should be getting the $300 as well. But that's just not the case, unfortunately, because each program that's coming out just has its own set of criteria. It's very confusing, and it's very hard for people to keep up with and to realize exactly if they're eligible or not. So we try to do our best with, with sending letters to just let them know exactly what the criteria are. But we've got, I think there's about 100,000 more people who haven't yet certified on their MyWAM accounts to let us know that they could be eligible for LWA. So we've been asking offices to make sure if they get phone calls in to their office that they've checked their MyWAM, they click on that link under their alerts, and they certify.
So that's a great comment that leads to this question, I think. So someone asked, what's being done for false claims that aren't imposter claims? Someone claiming that they were approved but didn't qualify. I mean, like you said, these changes have such an impact, not on only you as administrators of a program, but on people themselves. How do you handle that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's tough. I mean, we do our best to kind of put together documents that kind of, lay out eligibility criteria that make things as simple as possible, like making your transition from one claim type. If you run out of weeks, you need to get onto the federal benefits, it's automatic. You don't have to file another claim. Like some other states, you have to file for each claim every time. Ours is automatic. You can jump from one to the other. There's always going to be a few technical issues. There's always a few of those edge cases where the program didn't operate the right way, or things like that. But for those who, I think I know what the question directly is kind of coming from is those people who are victims of identity theft, who maybe aren't don't need to file for benefits, but they still had somebody use their social security number, use their personal information to file for government benefits. And so communication, so something on here that happens is, and when we flag for fraud, letters start to go from the USPS. We try not to use the MyWAM account because that's typically the criminal has access to it. And so we send letters in the mail. We send, verify your identity letters is usually one of the first ones that hits. So if they were successful and our fraud program didn't catch them, they'll get a thing in the mail that says, you filed for benefits. Congratulations, you're eligible for X number of weeks and X number of dollars. And if that happens and that comes to somebody who didn't file, we ask them to go to our website, michigan.gov/UIA, and report fraud on our website. So there's a link right there, report it. Now, something that I know needs to be bolstered is some of the feedback after you do that. So once you do that, it's a little bit of a waiting game. There's over 100,000 reports thus far, and we have to complete a full fraud investigation on every one of those. And that's going to take some time. Unfortunately. And so you think about, if your identity gets stolen with your bank, how long that takes to fix with your bank. And you're talking that, the same type of process we have to go through. And so I just got off the call right before I joined you guys. We have, some folks they will continue to get correspondence from our agency until that investigation is over. And so they can keep it for their records, as they should. If it's not in their name and it's just to their address, criminals like to use houses that are for sale as addresses. They'll go through the Remax book and use all of those addresses because people don't check the mail as often at those addresses. And so you'll see if your house is on the market, you're going to get a lot of letters to the address, but it's not your name. And so if it's not in your name, we're not a victim of identity theft. They're just taking your address. If it says, Stephanie Glidden applied for benefits and you didn't, they've got your social security number. And so our fraud unit is running investigations. They're contacting claimants if need be, and they're separating the criminal from the person to make sure that your social security number isn't reflective of any of the benefits that were paid or anything like that. And that's going to take time. So like as I said, we're getting, I think one last piece to dig just one inch deeper here is some people are getting letters that say, you have to repay dollars to us that,
Right.
that they're victims, right? They're victims. And so they're at no risk of wage garnishment, of tax intercepts. They should not repay us. It's a manual process for us to take those actions. And that is turned off. We're not doing that. We're getting through these investigations. And so they can keep that for their records, but just know, and we're doing follow-up notices starting this week to those people to let them know that exact thing, that communication may continue, but if you're a victim of identity theft, please, you're at no risk of financial action taken against you. So just, I want to put that out there, is that those folks will not have financial action taken against them. And that unfortunately, it is just going to take, some time for us to get through those while we're still doing historical weekly numbers of unemployment.
Right. Well, and these are no doubt experiences and instances that happen without COVID and without the number of claims you have.
Right.
So I can only imagine the stress and pressure that you and the staff at UIA are facing right now, especially in these kinds of cases. One other question, maybe as we close, in all the rush of things, what lessons are you learning from dealing with the spike in applications that may be put in your handbook and your playbook in future recessions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that we all should spend more time in whatever place we're at during COVID, writing those things down. I think that we need to ensure we're reflecting on what we're learning. And, I try to do that really, and I'd love to do it on a daily basis, but I tend to get to it about a monthly basis. So I'd say, living through this in the role that I'm in here, something that I would, make sure that we have available and we kind of train on is, especially with a department that's as large as ours. We have one of the largest agencies in government, especially now we've stacked up so much, but
Right.
It's really, not taking process improvement for granted. It's knowing and being able to really, there's so many steps to everything. To one, claimant's experience, I think, is something that we have really learned through this, is that what is the claimant's experience working their way through our program? It's something that we think about, okay, here's the IT's ready to go, the application's ready to go, we've got communications ready, but what really is that experience? It's something I think government really needs more of, is that like human eye, instead of the legal eye, instead of the, the tech eye, instead of that, like, we're good for audits. It's no, are we good for people? Are we good for that human interaction, that unemployed worker who just lost their job can interact with us in a comfortable and knowing way? So I think that, like, what I would want to do is make sure that is one of the first steps of, if a new recession comes, or, heaven forbid another one happens soon. It's just that, like, what is the customer and claimant experience interacting with your program from start to finish? And how can you make that as easy as possible? Because you're backlogged 2.8 million claims, so not only is it good for the customer or claimant, it's good for the agency as well. So I think that's always been missing from a lot of our government agencies, is that human eye, that human look, making sure that people can interact effectively with your program.
So one final question we have, since state law limits recipients to 20 weeks, if we didn't extend to 26 weeks through the EO, would we not have been eligible for the federal drawdown?
Yeah, so we would have gotten, so I'll start from the beginning. When we started this, we weren't sure yet. And so we knew with the recession back in 2008, the Great Recession, that we had to be at 26 back then to maximize what is considered, the program is called extended benefits. We ended up having 99 weeks of extended benefits during the Great Recession. And the only reason we got there was because we maxed out we were up to 26 weeks by statute. That's the only way USDOL lets you get to that percentage of extra weeks. So we knew that was going to be needed. And that's all federally paid for. And so right now, if we didn't go up to 26 weeks, it ended up PEUC, the 13-week extension, that first one that came with the CARES Act, is not connected to the 26 weeks. But just as we suspected, the extended benefits that comes on after that is connected to 26 weeks. And so we would lose, I believe, at least it's at least 3 weeks of extended benefits, up to 10 weeks, if we don't put that back onto 26 weeks. And that's just looking forward. And so that's a times how many people we have on unemployment right now is a lot of money. That's a lot of money that saves our trust fund. Our trust fund is still in a fairly healthy spot. We started at one of the healthiest across the country. I think we're number 4 with the number of dollars we had in our trust fund to pay for unemployment. And we need to preserve that as much as possible, so we stay in a healthy state. So our employers, they aren't burdened with extra dollars when they don't need to be. And so we want that federal drawdown. So yeah, so it would reduce the weeks. We're not quite sure how much yet. It's done by unemployment calculations on a monthly average basis. And so each month that kind of changes, but for sure we would lose the 6 weeks of the state UI and at least 3, if not 10 weeks of extended benefits for people. That's all federally paid for.
Well, Stephanie, thank you very much for taking time today. Great information. I'm very, very impressed myself with the knowledge, perspective, and expertise you have, and want to thank you for all you're doing for the citizens of the state of Michigan during this very rough time. So thank you again, and
thank you.
And good luck. So
thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So let's turn down to our final session on COVID-19 testing and tracing innovations. Very, very pleased and appreciative of the time these 3 MSU faculty members working on these matters are with us today. I'll introduce them. Dr. Joan Rose, who's the Homer Nolan Endowed Chair in Water Research in the College of Agriculture and Natural Resources, is with us. Dr. Jack Lipton, Chair and Professor of Translational Neuroscience in the College of Human Medicine, and Leo Kempel, the Dean and Professor of Electrical Engineering in the College of Engineering. My thanks to all 3 of you for being here today, for taking some time to talk about the work that's going on campus and how it relates back to helping Michigan residents and Michigan citizens with the COVID-19 issues around testing and tracing. So I'm not sure who, if we've agreed on an order here. We have not, so I'm going to go with Joan first. How's that? Joan,
sure, why not?
Why don't you go ahead, if you have slides to share, go ahead and do that. And appreciate you being here today.
No worries. Okay. So I'm an environmental virologist or water pollution microbiologist, and I work on water quality and on beaches and rivers and lakes, and I study wastewater as well. So when we found out that the SARS-CoV-2 virus was shed in feces, we began looking in wastewater for this virus. So I'm going to tell you very briefly what we're doing. Now, monitoring wastewater for the COVID virus is theoretically a leading indicator of cases of disease. Both asymptomatic people that are sick but are infected but don't have any symptoms, as well as people that are sick, excrete the virus. So the virus grows in the intestinal tract and excreted in the feces, and therefore it also ends up in sewage. We found out very early on in 2020 that you could detect this virus in wastewater, and began developing methods for its detection and models to calibrate the virus signal back to disease in the community. So it's hopefully being used, well, it's being used around the world, and we're looking at using it here to address early warning, address how the virus might be spreading, and to work with public health on interventions. And that would be, how do you allocate more testing? How do you improve communications? How do you reduce new cases? by closures or other means. And of course, protecting sensitive populations that might have high mortality. And ultimately, maybe looking at how this could be used to implement the vaccination program sometime next year. There's also approaches, and that's what we're doing at MSU, to look at how we tailor this to help universities or schools open back up without spreading the disease around. I'm just going to show you here, so most of you have probably seen the Michigan dashboard on diseases. Here on the left, you can see the cases that started showing up in March in our state, peaking in April. With the shutdown, we were able to the state was able to bring these cases down. We started opening back up, as you know, in June and July. We started seeing cases increase. And of course, we've been seeing cases increase in schools. In fact, in Ingham County, if you go to the county dashboard, it is also reporting outbreaks in schools or conditions in nursing homes and things like this. Now, on the right-hand side are wastewater treatment plants. We've been working with wastewater systems around the state. And so we began monitoring for this virus as we got the methods developed in April or May. And in all our communities, the level was pretty high in April and May, and it started coming down. And where we no longer could find the virus. But as you can see in different communities, little bumps showed up. The virus showed back up in wastewater. A large peak, you know, in this left bottom square showed up. And then in other communities, it was bouncing around, but it would show up one week and disappear the next week. So we believe there's still some infections in these communities. The large peaks are not being found, so sustained transmission to a large number of people. That may be the interpretation. So we're working with public health on this now. Now, what we're doing at MSU is looking directly into the sewer. You can see some technicians and scientists there working with sampling at the manhole and collecting a wastewater sample. We started in May on the campus. We were sampling areas that isolated some dorms, and we were also sampling sewers that were connected to a large volume of wastewater coming from East Lansing and also coming from the Meridian Township. So we had virus detection, as you can see, in May. It dropped down to 0 at the end of May and the beginning of June. But on June 15th, we found a very large peak in the East Lansing wastewater, but not on campus and not in the Meridian Township. Subsequently, as we've been monitoring, we've seen sustained transmission in East Lansing. Of course, we've been working with the county health, and they've been aware that there have been this outbreak in Harper's Bar in June 12th through the 20th is what they estimate the outbreak event took place. They were actually able to identify it on June 23rd. So we do think that we could use this as a leading indicator if we can get the results out to the right group. We then started seeing a few, hits of the virus in some of the other wastewater systems. So now we're monitoring dorms as well and looking at how we can match up what's happening with the students on campus with the testing program. And Jack's going to talk about this. I do want to end by saying that the state of Michigan is implementing a very large wastewater program. We're going to be part of that. We're one of the 18 advanced laboratories, which are using digital droplet PCR instrumentation. We're developing supplies and trainings. Dr. Shannon Briggs at Eagle is helping with that, and Dr. Erin Dreeland at MSU is overseeing some of the training programs. We'll begin analyzing data on the study of wastewater, I think from almost 60 communities across the state as a pilot. And we're going to explore how this can be used in the new year for some of the public health interventions that I already mentioned. So thank you very much for having me for this quick overview. I did send this PowerPoint and a 1-page on what's going on to the website, I guess it is, and it's available for you to download. So I'll
Thank
stop
you.
sharing.
Yep. Thanks, Joan. And if you could stick with us for questions later, greatly appreciate it.
Sure.
Great information and great work. Greatly appreciate your efforts. Let's stay with testing and go to Jack Lipton. And Jack, talk about the spit testing that you've developed.
All right, let's see if I can pick the right thing here. All right, you're seeing nothing right now? Is that working?
That's correct. There we go.
Okay, I'm on the right screen. All right, well, thank you for having me, Arnold. Appreciate the opportunity to talk a little bit about the program. So for those of you who don't know, MSU has developed, and I've been working with Joan on a surveillance program. So we have two different strategies. Joan's working on the wastewater piece, and we're working on the PCR testing of individuals, and we're doing that through saliva. So I'm just going to go through a quick history of the program. We're going to go through this really fast, and there'll be a lot of slides. So what were our original goals for this program? So we wanted to be able to monitor individuals on campus at MSU. So we wanted to operationalize an easy and non-invasive process to test asymptomatic faculty, staff, and students, because we all know that the standard process for getting, you go to your doctor and you go to one of these testing sites if you have symptoms and you are afraid of that you might have COVID. This is a way for us to look for hidden cases of COVID-19. We had to develop a system to collect, process, and analyze and transmit results on up to 10,000 samples per week. We did this within 8 weeks. We had to determine, the other thing we wanted to do, which is really important, is to determine which groups and what behaviors are associated with asymptomatic spread of the disease. We had to take proactive steps to minimize spread on and around campus. That's the reason for having the program. And we wanted to demonstrate that academic labs can rapidly transition to assist in this detection fight for COVID-19. And we wanted to instill confidence in MSU's ability to monitor its community of faculty, staff, and students in the surrounding campus area and on campus. So first thing we had to do is we developed a saliva kit. So we had to figure out a way that was non-invasive. We chose saliva. We did some research on this starting in April and developed a testing process whereby we could take that instead of a nasopharyngeal swab. And this is what our original prototype kit looked like. We had a box that was developed with the School of Packaging, which was an exciting design process. So we were using all the parts of the university and the expertise all around to try and help us do what we need to do. And you'll see this box has a couple of starburst cutouts here, and we use those for holding the spit vial and then the sample vial. And I'll show you that in a minute. This was turned then into a production piece, which they actually just came last week finally after much work. And they look like this. They were developed in collaboration with a company called Westrock. And these are fully branded with MSU. It has all of the parts of our kit, which include the small vial here, which is where the samples ultimately go. The spit vial, which is this large one here, a pipette tip or a pipetter, and then a biohazard bag for people to put their samples in, which they return to campus. Here's an example of how the box works. You can see the starburst cutouts, one for the large spit vial, one for the sample that comes back to the lab. We also developed in collaboration with a company called Lowry, which is in Brighton, Michigan, a special sticker that goes on the small vials. And you can see they have an auto ID spot and then an alphanumeric code on each side. The thing that looks like a QR code we use to scan samples into the lab, and the thing on the right is used by each individual who gets one of these test kits. They have to punch in that code so we can pair the test kit with the person. Here's an example of how that sticker works. It goes across a vial, and when they break that sticker, they use the alphanumeric code, and we use this one on the side. This is how we run these samples through the system, just so you can get a good idea of what we're doing. So someone gets a text and says, hey, we want to get your spit. So they have to go and pick up a kit and spit. They get the kit that I just showed you. Those are the 4 parts: the large spit tube, the small tube, the dropper, which you use to transfer your spit into the small tube, and the biohazard bag, which is used to return the sample into one of our drop boxes. You punch in the code here on our website. You have to put it in there twice so you don't make a mistake. You drop this off in one of our bins for collection. Those all get collected by people that go around and drive. We have some drivers that are from campus that collect these samples and bring them back to the laboratory, which was set up in the bioengineering building at Michigan State. This is where we scan the samples in, and you can see this is where those auto ID spots are really key in us collecting these samples and cataloging them quickly. Someone pulls the spit, we extract the RNA from it, put it into a smaller format, wash it, and set it up for amplification. We run the PCR test and we get our data. And then the data is, we developed an entire system with the information technology services to collect that data into a dashboard so we can analyze it. The data goes to our epidemiology group so they can look at specific behaviors that people may have logged along with their samples. We ask them what they've been doing for the last 7 days, who they've been hanging out with, have they been wearing a mask, and we can try and pair their behavioral data with the actual data we get on whether their samples have the presence of the virus in it or not. And then at the very end, they get a text. Their results are sent to them via email. They get a text that says, check your email and see how you did. Enrollment in this program, when we started advertising this program in August, it hadn't been running until September 11th, but we were trying to get pre-registrations. You can see it was fairly low until President Stanley put out an email and said, hey, you people should probably join this. And then you can see we had a real skyrocketing of participation. If you look at the distribution, the dark green is students, the medium greenish gray is staff, and the gray is faculty. So you can see the most of the people in our program are students. And this kind of just shows you the fluctuation of samples per day. Kind of in the middle of the week, we get most of them. We don't really collect on the weekend, but we're running approximately anywhere from 600 to 1,000 samples per day through this lab. And so we have a lot of value that we've gotten from this beyond our early goals. We've developed a rapidly deployable system using university intellectual and technological assets that were developed in collaboration with industry specialists. We've developed a cost-effective saliva kit for $3. We have a low per sample run cost of about $8 for the actual PCR test. And we think we have a really good system that is scalable to a statewide network of labs. And we've been offering this design to other universities, and they've come to check it out and are looking at adopting it. And the saliva kit itself and the production potential for that kit to be distributed may actually produce some valuable income for the university in a time of stress. I'm not going to really go through this, but the timeline for this included our research and the ask from the university for us to do this started in kind of late May, early June. And by that, over the last 2 to 3 months, we developed this entire lab, which takes up half a floor in bioengineering. And it was quite a task, but we have a lot of people that have demonstrated to me the value and diversity of the intellectual assets that we have at MSU, which has really been a privilege to be part of. So that's it.
Thank you, Jack. Great stuff. Greatly appreciate the work that you've been doing for sure. Before we get to questions, why don't we move to Leo Kempel, Dean of Engineering, to talk about some tracing efforts. Leo, you're muted.
You can't unmute while sharing a screen. I just learned something new with this technology. Okay, good. So I'm just going to real quick run through how the exposure notification technology works. This is something that's been developed by Apple and Google. Okay, so it'll work on both iPhones and Android phones. It's the app that's being developed is being developed by the Michigan Department of Human Services, or Health and Human Services. It's a partnership with Ingham County and MSU as pilot users. It should be flowing out very soon for us to use. So let me just talk how it works. This is an app that you would put on your phone. You download it, you answer some simple questions. Basically, you have the ability to tell it to turn on or not. And it has a portal where you can ask questions from Health and Human Services. It has the ability to invite others. It has the very important ability to inform others that you tested positive without revealing your name. So what it does not do is it doesn't know where you are. Okay, it will not be able to tell if you're at home, if you're in an office, Harper's Bar, any place else. It will not know where you're at. The significance of this technology is it helps us to try to determine close contacts in those unplanned events, like when you have a conversation while out walking or whatnot, and well, perhaps you were a little too close and talked for a little longer than was prudent. This is a way that you can keep track of that. We'll have no idea whether you're wearing a face covering or not. What it does do is it estimates distance. It will not reveal who you are to others. It will not reveal who you are to Apple, Google, the state of Michigan, Michigan State University, or anyone else. What it does do is, and this little graphic here kind of shows it. Let me go to a little larger mode. Well, hopefully a little larger mode. Let me figure out how to do that. This is kind of what my classes are like. I'm trying to figure out how to do things on the fly with this approach. So there's Alice and Bob, and they just have a pickup meeting on a park bench here. Okay, and again, don't know if their faces are covered. Don't know who they are. Two people. And what happens is if they both have the app running on their phones, again, could be Apple, could be Android, does not matter. They exchange tokens. Okay, these tokens are randomized. They do not identify you in any way. And Alice goes on her business and everything's going well. Unfortunately, Bob tests positive a day or two later. And Bob goes to get a diagnostic test, and that diagnostic test is positive. Bob calls up his county health department. So for those of us in Ingham County, it'd be the Ingham County Health Department. Ingham County would then give Bob a code. Okay, I believe it's a 5-digit code. It might be 6 digits. Doesn't matter. You stick that code into your phone. You choose as a user to enter that phone into your phone. At that point, your phone will notify the system that a positive occurred with Bob. What happens is Alice's phone periodically polls the system to see if any of the tokens on her phone in the last 10 days matches a token that has been declared positive. In the case I'm showing here, Bob declared a positive. Now Alice will get a message that somebody, it won't say Bob, it just say somebody that you have been in close proximity of within the last 10 days has tested positive. Here are the instructions. The instructions may be to self-quarantine. The instructions may be to go get a test on a certain date. Those instructions are tunable based upon the county and the details of the case. The key point of this is one of the big challenges in contact tracing is keeping track of who you had meetings with, who you were near. This technology, to an extent, will automate that and hopefully make contact tracing both more effective and more efficient. Because of course, a big challenge occurs is when contact tracing is not sufficiently efficient, then the only option that the county health officer has is to quarantine, for example, just large groups. So that's how the technology works. It'll be rolling out very soon. It'll get its pilot for the state in Ingham County, and MSU is a tied at the hip partner on that. But the intent would be that this would be statewide. And the way it's set up, it will be able to receive notifications from partner states. So let's say I go to Ohio, I'm having meetings, I come home, 3 days later, somebody I was near in Ohio at a meeting or in a restaurant or whatnot test positive, a message then would come to me here. Right, so this is not just for Michigan, there will be a broader context. Over.
Thank you, Leo. That's very, very interesting. Question for you though, that presupposes that both Bob and Alice have downloaded those keys, right?
Correct.
Yep.
Well, not keys, that they have the app running on their phone,
Okay.
right? So there will be a campaign on campus to encourage students and employees to go to the appropriate store, Apple, Google. We're setting it up so the app that MSU has will have a link so that you can just go to that, push a button if you're an Apple user or a Google user, and go to the appropriate place. I can tell you right now, Arnold, that when I'm a beta tester, so I've been playing with the app now for a few weeks. Once it goes live, I will be inviting my wife to download it. My daughter who lives in another county at another fine school in the great state of Michigan that we won't talk about, I'll be having her download it, maybe tell her friends and so forth, because the key to this is the more people who use it in a dense pattern, like apartment complexes, like residence halls, like the various places we come and go to, the more effective it will be.
Right. So let's talk about effectiveness of that app, which is pretty exciting stuff. Who, by the way, who developed the app?
So the core technology was developed in partnership between Apple and Google, and the app for Michigan, because there is only one app per state. The app for Michigan was developed by the technology folks of the state of Michigan in concert with the Department of Health and Human Services.
And so you said there's a different app for a particular app for each state. Is this already active in other states?
Yes, at this point, I know that Virginia has one, Virginia, Alabama. There's a combined one for Montana and North Dakota, I believe. They joined forces. The point is that the way that Apple and Google are doing it, in quite frankly, the feeling of really pushing privacy is you have to have a health department in the state sponsor it.
Okay.
This is a very similar technology to what they're doing at the University of Illinois. That particular app was developed by a spinoff of Illinois, but sponsored by the state of Illinois.
Yeah, I might be bringing up that other Big Ten university here in a moment.
It must not be spoken of.
No, the one down south we won't.
Certainly not on Halloween.
Yeah, we won't speak of that. But let's go back to the effectiveness question. So this presupposes that people are going to download the app.
Yep. Just
like it presupposes that people are going to get tested.
Yes.
And use the spit test. Jack, it pleases me to see how many students are actually doing this. Good for you, Leo. Excellent. Well, it sounds like it. You're all in.
It's fun.
Nothing like spitting.
But my question is, and this is kind of tough in this area because we know the struggles that we've been having in this area in particular with students, especially some off campus. For instance, it was noted to me, I think it was a couple of weeks ago, the Sparrow Testing Center dropped from like 240 tests a week to 15. So there was a fear that students are no longer getting tested for fear of being blackballed by other students along the way. Jack, and so the app has the same piece. You know, University of Illinois, my daughter graduated from the master's program there 2 years ago. And as they started school, she started getting emails still that she was missing her COVID test. She finally straightened that out. But how effective can this be on a voluntary basis?
It's a great question. So the problem that you have with a voluntary program is that you are selecting for the people that are interested in doing it. And
like Leo.
Yeah, like Leo. Right. We really appreciate Leo doing it, but the odds of Leo being one of our super spreaders is probably pretty low.
Oh, you don't know about me.
Based on what I know. I think that in order for a program to really be effective, it needs to include everybody. or it needs to have some kind of mandatory component, even if you're not making everyone do it. You need to be pulling all segments of your population so that you can really get an idea and sample fairly what's going on. Now, Joan's work, right? If you think about that, you don't have to volunteer for Joan's people to go into to open up a manhole and get a sample. So in that sense, it's only biased by the location in which you sample, but it's getting everyone no matter what. I think that for our program, we've demonstrated the feasibility and developed the logistics. I think it's really up to the university now to determine whether they want to move this towards something that is more mandatory for, say, people that live on campus or people that are doing face-to-face experiential learning. And I think that we're not going to be able to get everyone to get a perfect picture for everything, but if we can monitor the groups that are at the highest risk, and based upon what we're seeing, it's undergraduates far and away. We've had maybe, I think, one faculty and one staff member. Everyone else has been an undergraduate in our program that is testing positive, and that's it.
So let's continue down this road. So do we have capacity, for instance, Jack, with the spit test program? I mean, it doesn't sound like we have, even if tomorrow the president said, or the Ingham County health officer said, every MSU student must get tested. It would take you 50 days. Well, no, because that's not how many, I don't know how many students we've got on campus right now and off campus. I think we've got up to 25 or 30,000 off campus. It would take a long time for you to process those tests, wouldn't it? We don't have capacity there, correct?
Correct. Now, the lab runs 5 days a week and can process a maximum of about 2,400 samples per day. Okay. We've already been in strategic planning sessions, to think about scenario planning for this, moving the lab to double shifts and moving it to 7 days per week, and adding in some more individuals to work on this, deepen our bench, because right now this is being run by faculty and staff on top of their regular jobs, and then we've hired in some recent graduates who are willing to learn and bright and idealistic, and so that's helped. But if we're going to really do that, we're going to have to double the capacity of the laboratory. But we have a system in place, and it's cost effective. We would have to double the cost to do that, but I don't think, not per sample, just because we're running so many. But yeah, I think it's possible, and if we need to scale up by January, we can do it. We just have to be given the green light. And
right, Arnold, it's really just parallel processing.
Yeah, right. And that I was going to ask that about parallel processing with what Joan's work is, because that seems to run parallel too. I mean, Joan, you could be using, or we could be, or whoever could be, using wastewater testing right now. When you see a spike in a particular area, as has been done elsewhere, you could quarantine that specific area, correct?
That's correct. And I think that we've got enough data now and experience to, one, streamline the sampling, and then spatially, we need to decide where we want to sample, and maybe in a nested approach where if you get a positive here in this region, then the next day you go up and you take 3 more samples to to isolate the area. But people have been able to isolate buildings like hospitals,
right?
Specific, we've been able to identify 14 locations that isolate the dorms around the campus, so that we could keep an eye on the infection.
Right.
And so
Arnold, and this is a little dangerous to do, but I'm going to hypothesize. Let's say Joan's program identifies that a residence hall that has people in it looks positive. Okay. Jack has the ability then to reschedule some of the schedule when people do their tests, so you could focus it in on that group a bit, right? And then of course with exposure notification, let's say that I'm in that residence hall that Joan identified as a potential site, right? And Jack's program has zeroed in that I should go get tested. Okay, and I get tested. Now I'm letting all the people I was near, not just in that residence hall, but various places on campus, off campus, in the community, know that they may need to get tested. This is a way to get in front of it faster. And that,
Not just a way to get in
I am
front of
not the expert, but
No.
Jack, getting in front fast is good, right?
not just getting in front faster, Leo, but bringing students back to campus. I mean, it seems to me that, and now, you know, Matt can tell me if I'm going off the rails here, I'm sure he'll chime in, but it seems to me that if we want to bring students back to campus in greater numbers, let alone who's ever living off campus, and begin normalizing operations again on campus, all of these three things have to work together, and students, faculty, and staff have to work together to make it happen and make it work. That's the, I mean, because like you said, Leo, these are all parallel processes.
And the key is, it's all about not yourself, it's about others.
Yeah.
Not about me, it's about we.
And I think
Okay.
if, you know, we have a good system and it is mandatory. I mean, most of the students, they do want to come back to campus. They want to come back to class. So I think if we do have a system that says, look, we're going to try to stop the spread quickly. Yes, some may have to be quarantined,
Right.
but that means that the majority, you can keep going, you know, going to class, et cetera, having a, you know, having a campus life. And so I think that's the benefit of it.
Yeah. And what we know too, what we're learning too, at least what I'm learning about how younger population symptoms related with this, it might just be something like a cold, or you think you have allergies or a light fever. Certainly it would seem that many in the student age population are not getting the severe symptoms we've seen in the older population. And so, you know, some of them aren't going to get a test right now because, hey, you know, I've had a cold before, I've had allergies before, I've had a one-day fever before, but Leo, Joan, and Jack, your work is so important, I think, to, again, getting back to some kind of normal here on campus at Michigan State University, especially, and in Michigan, and probably across the country. But let's start home. Let's start home and set an example, and try and get things back to some kind of normal operationally here on campus. I keep telling people,
Absolutely.
for me personally, I don't know, whoever said working from home would be great, but I have very mixed emotions about working from home. Human beings are social beings. I'm one of those social beings. I miss actually being in meetings with people like you. And today would have been an in-person event for us over downtown with the staff and everything. And it's
Right.
really that interaction that I think so many of us are missing. I know that I am, but I want to thank you all for your efforts. Greatly appreciated. I know that because of your efforts, we'll get back to some form of normal here in the near future. I'm confident of that. I want to thank
Thanks,
everyone who had the opportunity to attend today. Thank you to our staff, Cindy Kyle, our director, Matt Grossman, our partners in this, MSU Extension and the Office of Government Affairs, and last but not least, the W.K. Kellogg Foundation for their continued support. Thanks again, everyone. Have a great weekend, and look for another staff training session in the near future.
Thanks,
Enjoy
folks.
that
Take
fall.
care.
Enjoy the fall weather this weekend.
Yes.
Last chance.
Bye. Thank you.